So here's an example of the channel pull setup on the job here. You can see I've got three individual cabinets side by side here, and just the one rail that runs the full width of all of them. And so the way that's done is now in the prompts for the product. As soon as you turn on a finished end, it assumes that you need to include the rail with that particular cabinet. If you don't have finished end turned on, by default, it's going to assume you don't need those rails included with the cabinet. There's an option to turn on the default in the globals. So when I have this turned on my advanced options tab here in underneath include the finger pull rail, I also have include the finger pull rail in this cabinet, meaning that I'm actually going to include the piece of material that's going to create those rails. And so I can specify whether there's a notch on the left and right side, and by default that's just going to drive from the left and right finished end prompts. So if there's a finished end, obviously those are going to be unchecked, and if there is a finished end, then those are going to be checked. But if for some reason you need to override that, then you can do that as well. Here, finger pull rail length, I just threw a formula in there to calculate it, but you could just draw your products out, double click in here and say go from the inside point there to the inside point there, and get your value that way as well. That's going to drive into the subassemblies. There's three different subassemblies that are or two different subassemblies that are affected. The carcass base has the rail from the top of the cabinet, and then the stretchers have the other ones, and so those machining operations come from each of those independently as well. And so if for some reason you had a case where maybe you have a door cabinet beside this run of drawer banks, and so for the um, you want that rail to run all the way across from the door cabinet all the way across in front of those drawer banks as well, then you can still go into the individuals and turn those rails off. So by default, if you turn off this include rail in this product off in the product itself. So if you turn this off in the product, it's going to affect both the top rail as well as the stretchers. But if for some reason, like you've got a door cabinet beside and you want to run a longer rail, you can turn those off independently as well. So if you go show subassembly prompts here, there is on the construction options a include finger pull rail on this cabinet, and so if you turn that one off, that would just affect the top rail. And then you could do the same thing in these single rails if for some other reason you needed to turn off the ones just in that finger pull rail, then you could adjust that. And so these are going to read from the product otherwise. So that should give you what you need in order to create those products. So if we look at these cabinets individually, we'll see that this one here, if we turn these off for a minute, and we'll just say isolate this middle one, you can see there's not actually any parts being created with this one because they're going to come from the adjacent cabinets, and then we've got our notches to receive those rails as well, and they have the little ears on there so that you don't have to square those corners out, and because they're unfinished ends, that will work just fine. And they're set up to do in 3 passes so they don't blow the edge banding out. Alternatively, you could set it up with left and right cutter with coming in with a couple of different operations, but I set it up with 3 passes as you wanted there. So if you have any questions about that, let me know.